Kamala Harris's AIPAC handler husband has spent his time conflating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism and advocating for censorship of Americans. Doug Emhoff repeatedly uses the fraudulent ADL definition for anti-Semitism, where if you don't support the Zionist entity known as Israel, you are considered an anti-Semite. Doug Emhoff played a key role in the Biden administration combating student protesters, where the Biden administration conflated the protesters with anti-Semitism and terrorist supporters. Doug Emhoff makes it clear that he speaks on Kamala Harris for Israel. Here he is on CNN explaining how Kamala Harris, just like genocide Joe Biden, will be a diehard supporter of Israel.
Let me just make this clear. Vice President Harris has been and will be a strong supporter of Israel as a secure, democratic, and Jewish state, and she will always ensure that Israel can defend itself, period. That's who Kamala Harris is.
Meanwhile, progressives are shocked that Kamala Harris doesn't support an arms embargo. And obviously, Doug Emhoff, her husband, has a lot of influence on her because Kamala Harris fights for Israel more than she fights for Black Americans.
Let's really be clear about that. So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm going to do something that's only going to benefit Black people. No. Which is why I support the United States commitment to provide Israel with $38 billion in military assistance over the next decade.
This is why the discussion on whether she's Black or Indian is mostly useless. Kamala Harris, at the end of the day, is Israel first.
What's poppin', my friends? My family, we are back once again. Nick at noon, Nick at night, Nick in the morning, Nick anytime. What's poppin'? We got people that watch all over. I'm always blessed when I hear the different locations of the RBN community. We are truly international. What's poppin', my friends? Speaking of international, we had another week of banger guests that highlights my commitment to build a true international left coalition. And we have Venezuela Analysis, who did amazing, and they continue to do amazing work, debunking the lies of the empire about the global south. We have Shahid Bosin and his amazing colleague, who is forming an international anti-genocide coalition of his own, holding Israel accountable. Shahid Bosin probably dropped the greatest lecture in RBN history. And so Kathan, debunking propaganda about Bangladesh. We always learning new things here at RBN, my friends. I told you guys, this is the new era. I'm very excited about everything that's going on. I'm very excited to meet all our comrades in Chicago. And this Friday, like I was planning on trying to take it easy this week, but man, I gave a speech on Sunday. This is the third live stream in a row for me. And then on Friday, I'm putting together a masterpiece, because I don't know if you guys peeped this. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, because we're going to debunk this later today, because I'm going to debunk this and destroy this with absolute ruthless aggression, my friends. Because this here is why I told you guys, Democrats are the most effective evil. Republicans in a million years never could dream of putting together a psyop within the last 48 hours to get Black people and Palestinians to fight. So K-Hive, a lot of these sellout Black liberals and I want to emphasize this again, I said this on Jimmy Dore, we know that K-Hive bots was reprogrammed correct the record bots. So over the last 48 hours, if you guys have missed it, there has been a coordinated campaign in order to drive a wedge between Palestinians and Black Americans. And anyone who follows RBN knows this is nonsense. There's been a long-standing solidarity between African Americans and Palestinians. But in order to cover for their favorite genocidal girl boss committing a genocide and their party committing a genocide, Black liberals and their white liberals that are using blackface online is trying to start a race war. Look, the watermelon people, I told you guys there's no bigger enemy than a Black liberal, than the shit-lived class. They are the most effective evil. In order to distract from a genocide, they try to stoke racial tensions between two oppressed people. And this is what they've been doing for decades. These black neocons, these black imperialists, smearing our brothers and sisters who are victims of the same empire that we are. So, you guys already know I'm in the lab cooking, and they failed because the only thing that happened was after initial panic because they had a very coordinated strategy in order to drive this wedge between Black Americans and Palestinians. Well, all these people sent out these posts over 24 hours. The liberal Black influencers went on unhinged racist rants, and it was all boosted by DNC bots in the algorithm. This nonsense. But trust me, I am in the lab cooking. I'm working on something this Friday before Chicago, where we're going to have an emergency Palestinian roundtable, where we're going to have on-the-ground activists, people who are prominent in the Palestinian community, with me, Rome, and Ajama Baraka from Black Alliance for Peace, and we are going to debunk this bullshit and destroy this anti-solidarity obvious CIA op. That's coming maybe this weekend. And I explain here how there's a long-standing history that go back decades between the Black Panthers and Palestinians. But the best thing about this is that because of this PSYOP, the only thing that happened was unify the Black left and Palestinians even more. You see all these, after we was shell-shocked after the PSYOP, it was like, holy shit, all right, we need to counteract this, and we was on game. This Finney has a viral post this morning, 4,000 likes. I had a few viral tweets talking about this, sharing my receipts. And she's educating people. This is me shouting out my sister Finney. Big shout out to her. Really these tap dancing, chucking, jiving. And you see all these threads made by both the Palestinian liberation fighters and their supporters and Black activists. I think she linked one of the threads. I know I did. The point I'm making is the only thing they accomplished was drive in this solidarity movement closer together. And I'm going to have a massive roundtable. Let me see if I can get my tweet up. Oh shit! I didn't plan this. I just want to make sure we promote this because we gonna, as you guys know, I cut the head off of PSYOP dragons before they even get started. So this is my announcement. I'm currently planning a Palestinian roundtable this week to debunk the CIA chaos CIA tactic. Rome gonna be there. Jama Braka's gonna be there, and we working on getting some very high-profile names in the Palestinian resistance movement. I want you guys to know that we're going to play a very big role in debunking this bullshit propaganda. Big shout out to everyone who reached out to me. Like, look, like we all came out. Like this had 2,000 likes on this. Finney came out. All like the entirety of the Black left and the Palestinian left immediately came out to debunk this bullshit. I don't want to spoil too much of this because I'm gonna show this on my live stream, my interviews I did with Palestinians as well. Man, what the other thread at? I was trying to find a thread, but I'm getting lost in the sauce now. So we can get back on topic. We're gonna have my guest join us here very soon. Fiona Edwards, who does amazing work writing about the global South and the United States Cold War against China and the NATO proxy war. This is the person who's going to be the first gentleman of the United States. And there are people who believe that Kamala is going to be nicer to Palestinian people. The second husband has spent his entire time as second husband pushing the anti-Semitism hoax. The only source of anti-Semitism are the people who conflate the genocidal terrorist regime of Israel with Jews, with all Jews. So Kamala married her AIPAC handler, which I don't care. I use AIPAC as a slur because, as I explained, AIPAC is not just a singular entity, my friends. There's 3 million donors to AIPAC. They don't donate to mutual aid. I have a mutual aid event that we're sponsoring on the 29th. Give away free haircuts, free school supplies. And I think I got my guest in the back, Fiona Edwards. I will introduce you here very soon. Thank you for joining us. I'm looking forward to hearing from your perspective. So I want you guys to understand that AIPAC, and there are 3 million Americans at least, and this is on the books, that donate to AIPAC. Not only, and they're far from the only Zionist lobby, by the way. You had Cori Bush, who's not great on the issue of imperialism, but she called out AIPAC, and immediately the Biden administration called out Cori Bush and said her comments regarding AIPAC as unhelpful. And you had the Biden administration that smeared people engaging in the First Amendment rights as terrorist supporters. You want to know who played a giant role in this? Kamala Harris's AIPAC husband, Doug Emhoff, who was the chief architect of the White House policy on anti-Semitism, where they conflated criticism of the foreign policy of a genocidal apartheid state with anti-Semitism. So does it surprise you? And this is the main headline I titled this video with, but we're going to have a lot to talk about. Does it surprise you that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who was guided by her AIPAC husband, is enabling Israeli terrorism? This is in the West Bank. I got this screen up as a filler. This is a CNN headline that couldn't possibly be more vague. So there's a IDF-sponsored unit, official unit in Israel, and you see how CNN say they're accused of human rights violation. That's a really weird way of saying terrorism. This IDF unit lynches Palestinians. They was caught executing a Palestinian elder in his own home. And then they came out with headlines, and everyone who was a propagandist for the Democratic Party repeated the bullshit headline where the Biden administration said, we are considering putting sanctions on the IDF terrorist organizations, launching attacks in not Gaza, but in the West Bank. So after letting the headline fester for weeks, and I called out like, what do you mean consider? That's how you know it's bullshit. But after weeks of fake progressives giving these people props they don't deserve, then they come out and say, oh, I know we said we were going to consider that for weeks for good propaganda. No, we're not. We're going to enable Israeli terrorism in the West Bank. And then, meanwhile, the dumbest people in politics, the progressive left, the Bernie supporters, they are making the argument that somehow Kamala Harris is somehow better than Trump. I don't believe in lesser two evilism. They are two heads of an imperialist dragon. That is the official position of RBN. But the idea that Trump will be worse than Biden and Kamala, who are literally arming Israeli terrorist groups, and I've been asking this question for weeks. No one gave me an example. Give me concrete, specific examples on how Trump will be worse than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. There is none. They continue all the policies. They are funding Israeli terrorist groups. And does this surprise you? Is this news for Kamala Harris? It is absolutely not. So the dumb left, who is our enemy, by the way, they are our enemy. They are manufacturing consent behind Kamala Harris when Kamala Harris was a senator her first year. Her first year as a senator. Do you guys know what Kamala Harris did? She joined Marco Rubio and the most insane neocons in Congress in order to condemn a UN resolution calling out Israel for their illegal settlements in the West Bank. And people want to tell me her AIPAC handler husband has no influence on her policies? Kamala Harris got to where she at because she's a crazy, unhinged Zionist. I'll just read this passage here, and I introduce my guest. I wasn't planning on this rant in the beginning, but it's very hard not to get pissed at this, right? As a senator for California, Kamala Harris co-sponsored a Senate bill against anti-Israel bias, where the UN was calling out the illegal settlements. Anyway, let me get my guest in here. I'm gonna pop a blood vessel in here. We have an amazing guest join us today who does great writing on Latin America, the U.S. Cold War against China, and just generally covering the United States propaganda. We have Fiona Edwards join us on RBN. Thank you for making time.
Oh, it's really great to be joining you. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be with you tonight.
Absolutely. And just to get things started, I was ranting about the policies that we can expect under Kamala Harris. And I don't know why people are doing this thing where they're trying to separate Kamala Harris's policies from Joe Biden, even though she, unlike many of the public officials who resigned in protest, she stayed right on board. She supported the policy, so that never makes sense to me. But this is what Biden and Kamala are doing right now as they are pretending to support a ceasefire. They are arming Israel as they committed one of the most disgusting war crimes we have seen. And I'm going to show you guys here very soon, the UN and the entire global community condemning Israel for the slaughter of Palestinians. And as this is going on, the United States is sending more weapons. So just very vaguely and as an introduction, thank you for your time once again. I want to get your thoughts on the genocidal mass psychosis of the West that is supporting arming the genocide in Gaza. You can take it anywhere you want. Thank you for joining me on RBN once again.
No problem at all. Well, I mean, I think to begin with, just to say there is unfortunately this bipartisan consensus for war, for a massive war drive. And I think this is happening on three fronts at the moment, which I'll return to. But in terms of the situation in Palestine, which is absolutely horrific. I mean, if anybody has been watching the images coming through on their timelines over the last few weeks, well, 10 months, but I mean, the last few days have been absolutely horrific. We're seeing beheaded babies, like absolute slaughter. And like you say, there's this very fake sort of PR campaign that we see from US officials. But the reality is, while they give lip service to talk about a ceasefire, what they're actually doing is arming this genocidal regime in Israel to the tune of 20 billion in arms just yesterday, including 18 billion in fighter jets. And this is on top of the already 12 billion that the United States has been providing Israel in military aid since October alone. And of course, we know that the United States gives 3.8 billion to Israel every single year. And I think we see a lot of like reports in the media that Israel's doing this and Israel's doing that. Well, I think all those headlines need to say the US and Israel are doing this, because the reality is this isn't Absolutely. An Israeli genocide. This is a US Israeli genocide. And well said. There is just no material way that the Israeli regime would be able to do this without the support of the United States empire. It's just not possible. And so all of this very sophisticated PR we see, in reality, this is a US genocide. And I think a really good analogy is, the US administration's the mafia boss and Israel is the local gangster carrying out the crimes. And I think that's a very important way to see it. But I mean, I think the horrific situation that we're seeing in Gaza and in the West Bank that you referred to is a new level of violence from Israel that I think we have ever seen. And they've been very clear about their stated objectives around trying to basically destroy Gaza completely, to wipe out Hamas completely. And really it's about wiping out the Palestinian people. And I think that's why the term genocide is so appropriate. But when you look at why is the US doing this? Have they got exactly the same goals? I think we have to look at the wider context, which is that the United States is in decline at the moment. They're failing to win the NATO proxy war in Ukraine. They're very, very concerned about the rise of China in terms of its economic rise. And so in a certain sense, what they are doing in Gaza is trying to teach the world a lesson. If you rise up, this is what you'll get. And I think it was the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, that said that, this is about trying to teach people a lesson about not rising up against US hegemony. So I think that the US has felt it very necessary to support such a far-right extreme regime in Israel to kind of prove a point, which is obviously a particular, this is a horrific situation. But I think that's really what's going on. But I think it's really important to keep coming back to the role of the US, because they're going to try and whitewash themselves of this and pretend that there's more distance between them and Netanyahu and the far right in Israel. But actually, I think it is better to understand this as really central to US foreign policy, and this being in somehow they see this as in their interest in terms of sending a message to the rest of the global south, but also trying to control the region in general.
That's definitely an interesting point, sending a message to the global south. And it's definitely a message that the Likud party and their supporters, which include Genocide Joe, who is as extreme as a Zionist as they come. And you make a great point of how it's the United States genocide, because Joe Biden armed, facilitated, and provided diplomatic immunity for the genocide. He said he saw evidence of Al-Shifa Hospital being a Hamas headquarters. And then it later came out, not via independent news, but the London Times, the Washington Post did investigations that showed there's no evidence of that. And also the at face value evidence that the IDF gave was laughable at face value. But despite that, Biden was there at every step of the way. And that's just one of many examples of facilitating this genocide. So you had the International Criminal Court that actually did a major favor to Western powers by only putting arrest warrants on Benjamin Netanyahu and 2 other Israeli officials. And you got to see how the game and how international law is rigged, because they did that to make sure that they had more arrest warrants on Hamas officials. If I believe it was like 4 Hamas officials who had arrest warrants that was announced. So it was 4 Hamas officials, but 3 Israelis. And my question I asked at the time was, why only 3? Why only 3? Why not include Joe Biden, who's already facilitated it? Why not include Germany, who South Africa included a lawsuit on them for facilitating the genocide? I want to pass it to you for any other thoughts. I want to make sure I plug your page. Make sure you guys follow Fiona Edwards, who got a great website, Eyes on Latin America. So I'll make sure I check that out. Anything else you want to add before I continue with more media headlines here?
Yeah, well, just to say, I mean, I think obviously we have the United States and Europe and the global north, fully behind Israel and its atrocities and arming it, and all of this is possible because of that. But actually, obviously within these countries themselves, but also internationally, I think there really is a global majority on the side of Palestine. I think it is very important to remember that. And it's, the US is using its massive military might to kind of, really hit hard the Palestinians, but also just hit hard all of humanity, that want to live in peace. So I think it's important to remember that, we are in a majority, and it obviously feels at the moment that we're not, able to stop what's happening. But I think, many governments in the global south have been consistently pushing, for a ceasefire. We've had, China brokering unity amongst Palestinian factions, pushing for, lots of global south countries pushing for the recognition of a Palestinian state. So I think, there obviously is a big geopolitical contest here, but the issue is the US is really doubling down on supporting an extreme right regime in Israel.
It's very important, and it's such a great point that you continue to make, that the global majority has been in solidarity with Palestinians, and it has been for quite some time, which is why I refuse to give quarter to Zionists. I don't give an inch, as they paint, for example, the college protesters as terrorist supporters. I have these liberals who are in shambles in my mentions on Twitter that accuse me of being a terrorist supporter. And I'm like, it's you guys, sir and ma'am, that invited a criminal, Benjamin Netanyahu, an indicted criminal, not according to my radical, crazy, black Marxist laws. These are the laws that you guys wrote. According to the laws that you guys wrote and championed, Benjamin Netanyahu is a criminal. You guys invited him, and you guys wine and dine with terrorist criminals. So we cannot allow the establishment to ever gaslight us about this. That's why it's an important point to make. Now I'm going to show you guys, Israel had a complete meltdown at the UN, because as Israel slaughtered children at a school, they are finding out that their excuse as saying that the school is ran by Hamas is not quite cutting it anymore, which again showed the terrorist ideology of Israelis and Zionists. They legitimately believe, or maybe they don't. Either way, it's bad, right? But let's say they legitimately believe that they have the right to murder children at the tune of hundreds, dozens, in order to kill maybe 1 or 2 Hamas fighters. So what they're saying is that international law be damned. We can do whatever we want, in order to accomplish our political objective, which is the ideology of a terrorist, my friends. A terrorist is someone who believes that they can accomplish their political objectives, international law, and human rights be damned. Give me a better definition. That's what Israel is. Now I'm gonna show you guys, and I'll pass to you for any thoughts. China. Actually, I'm actually kind of interested in seeing this video. I didn't know they had a video attached to this. So I'm gonna pass it to you, but I'm gonna read this headline. I'm actually interested in watching this video. China's UN envoy, condemns Israel for heinous Gaza school massacre. And I'm gonna play this video, but I'm gonna show this other headline before I do that. As you have the global majority condemning Israel, guess who defending Israel? The genocidal West. And I described it as a genocidal mass psychosis going on in the West that's going to be studied for decades, I believe. So as the world is condemning this, Germany is defending it. So before I play this video, because I actually haven't seen this, I'm just curious. Before I do that, do you want to add anything to this, Fiona?
Well, yeah, let's watch the video first, and then maybe can come in.
Hey, perfect. I haven't seen it. I'm just interested in seeing it. So let's check it out. So if you're only listening, it's subtitled, but it's essentially China condemning Israel's slaughtered children. So I'm gonna let it play, but that's essentially what it is. Feel free to follow along. Imagine how this like for the rest of the world to explain stuff that is common sense to the genocidal West, and then the leaders of the genocidal West still reject it. Because look at what he's saying here. What he's saying here is you are not allowed to attack children of people that ran away and taken shelter. No shit. Can you guys not hear it? I think I saw someone say no sound. Can you hear it, Fiona?
No, I was been following the subtitles like you, but I mean,
sorry, I didn't realize it was a glitch. I'll reload it, but you want to chime in real quick as I get set up?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's just really important to say, because I think one of the kind of blind spots of the solidarity movement, at least international solidarity movement with Palestine, at least in the global north, in the West, is to underestimate actually how much support the Palestinians have internationally in the global south. And that obviously does include China. I mean, China's been calling for a ceasefire since day one. They've been calling the kind of root cause of the issue, the lack of justice for the Palestinians, the fact that the Palestinians are oppressed. They've been calling for an independent Palestinian state since day one. And they've been taking a number of initiatives diplomatically to try and push that agenda. Obviously, at every UN Security Council where you have the United States vetoing ceasefire after ceasefire after ceasefire, you've got China voting for it with the global majority. But in addition to that, they've made proposals for a Gaza peace conference. They've been, like I mentioned before, they've been trying to reconcile the Palestinian factions, including Hamas and Fatah. And there was a historic deal just back in, I think it was in May. I think it was in July. The peace conference proposal came out in May. And so this is, these are, moves that that China is making. And so anyone that says, there's no difference in terms of the United States and China when it comes to international relations and foreign policy, I mean, what kind of news are they watching? Because there's a massive difference, and especially in the context of senior Israeli officials basically declaring that they don't want a Palestinian state, and their whole actions and the whole logic of what they're doing in Gaza is to wipe Palestine off the map, and obviously all these attacks on the West Bank. It is actually very important that there are countries, really big countries like China and others, that are really pushing hard for the creation of a independent Palestinian state. So I think that needs to be more recognized, I think, in the solidarity movement, because actually we should be linking up with that global majority to kind of put pressure on the situation.
Well said. That's why I've been enthusiastically calling for an international anti-imperialist coalition, because they have their NATOs, their EUs, they have their coalitions. Why shouldn't we? You know what I mean? And it's not a coincidence that Javier Milei of Argentina supports Israel. when you look at the Venezuelan opposition to Nicolas Maduro, they support Israel. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, you look at the countries they tell us to hate, North Korea being one of them, has been a country that has been standing in solidarity with the Palestinian state for decades. To this day, North Korea still doesn't recognize Israel based. Meanwhile, these are the countries that we were told to hate, Fiona. Xi Jinping is a tyrant as he speaks out against genocide. And as I show, you have Germany and the West that are defending Israel. The contrast is astounding. I am not one of the people that say all these states are perfect. I just think it's clear what states are on the right side of this issue for humanity. It's just, how is that even controversial to say? That doesn't make you a Putin puppet. Doesn't make you a Xi Jinping puppet. Doesn't make me a North Korean stan, even though I'm a fan. But it's just common sense. There's one side standing against Nazism and genocide versus the other side advocating for it. It's very simple. So I'm gonna play the video. Go ahead. Feel free to chime in anytime you want. It's a great conversation. Go ahead.
Well, no, 100%. And I think one of the sort of tactics of the ruling class in the global north is to make us feel incredibly isolated. They try and pretend that, opinion poll after opinion poll isn't with the Palestinians and for a ceasefire. Obviously, despite the massive mainstream media bias, people have found out the truth because they're watching through their phones, like actual live testimony from Gaza. And, there's been a really powerful pushback on the internet against the pro-Israel line. But they really are trying to sort of isolate us. So it is important because, when we're marching, for a ceasefire against these attacks, against genocide, we're marching with people with all sorts of ideologies and points of view. And we would very much disagree on almost anything else, and that's the thing. One of the slogans of the campaign I'm involved in, which is No Cold War, is, China is not our enemy. And it doesn't mean, we love China. Like, people can have all different views. I mean, I personally think China's doing some really incredible progressive things, but you can really not like China, but you can appreciate that they are standing up for a ceasefire, which is completely different to what, like you say, Germany, Britain, the United States has been doing. And they're trying to push, for a Palestinian state in a genuine way. Whereas I think the global north, sometimes countries in the global north say things like, oh yeah, we support Palestinian state, but they don't really, because every action they take is taking things in the exact opposite direction. But there is a very genuine support in China, Russia, and all over the global south for the establishment of a Palestinian state. And I think it is important for the peace movement in the global north to not go, well, just because the United States is saying China's our enemy, Russia's our enemy, and all these countries in the global south should have nothing to do with them. We shouldn't go along with that. And we should actually realize that, well, this is part of a global alliance for something that we care about, which is stopping this genocide and for Palestinian liberation. So I think, this is a very concrete example where you have to kind of really look at beyond the propaganda and what is the real position.
Yeah, on my speech I gave Sunday in our rally with Shaba and Jill Stein, I openly said in my speech that China is not our enemy, Iran is not our enemy, Russia is not our enemy. That is what I lead with, my friends. I said in my speech, I say it in multiple speeches in public. Like, the establishment want us to hate these people who are not our enemy. The same thing that the progressive left is fighting for their people. Russia has standard public health care, paid maternity leave, for example. There's no reason for us to dislike them. In fact, and I have said this multiple times, the biggest mistake that the peace movement has made in the West, which has led the anti-war movement to be largely unsuccessful, is the inability to humanize the enemies of the CIA and the military-industrial complex. If you are telling people that Putin is evil, if you have the Bernie Sanders, Dr. Cornel West style of politics, and you want to convince people that Putin is evil, you're undermining your message of peace. I know it may sound trivial, but these things add up and it matters. The left in America and the West's inability to humanize the enemy is directly what led to us being unsuccessful at stopping genocide, at stopping these endless war. And more than just showing up, it's a new culture, it's decolonizing your mind. But I'm going to play this video now. Hopefully it makes a little bit more sense when you can hear it. I know he's not speaking English, but to my joke I made earlier where it's like, they got explained it. Like, you can tell in their voice, like, whenever I see these videos of the UN, maybe it'll make more sense when you hear the tone of his voice. It's like, man, I really have to explain to you guys how killing children at a school is barbaric. So let's play with some sound, but make sure you guys follow along. Essentially, China condemning Israel. Feel free to chime in anytime. This is a great conversation.
塔宾学校夺去了上百名无辜平民的生命，中方予以强烈谴责。平民及民用设施不能成为军事行动的目标，这是国际人道法规定的红线。有大量平民聚居的学校一而再、再而三地遭到袭击，这种行为令人发指。在过去10个月里，加沙100万民众家园被毁，亲人离散，他们被迫从一个地方转移到另一个地方，为的是寻找一处安宁的角落，但等待他们的还是无差别的轰炸和随时降临的死亡。立即实现持久停火是加沙民众的迫切期盼，也是国际社会压倒性共识。美国在2个月前推动安理会第2735号决议时，声称以色列已经接受停火协议，但现实却恰恰相反。
This is a point I make all the time on the channel, and I'm a corporate media hawk. I watch our enemies. They never cover this stuff because this is China cooking the United States on the UN stage, cooking their hypocrisy. Even though they hide this from the American people, and they would talk about a bunch of deeply unserious shit. You want to know what they cover on Press TV? You want to know what they cover on RT? You want to know what they cover in Chinese state media, what they cover in media in South America and India? They are showing the United States consistently being cooked by China and Russia, and people wonder why they view the United States as the #1. And this is a global poll from a while ago, where majority of the global population view the United States as the #1 obstacle of peace. Why Africans are preferring China? Because yes, Americans are little sheltered, propagandized babies, but the rest of the world is seeing this hypocrisy on a grand scale. I'm gonna end the clip here because I think you guys get the point. Fiona, anything you want to add before I continue?
No, I think, yeah, well said. I'll let you continue.
Yeah, and pretty much I'm gonna get to NATO because I still want to cover a few other topics as well. But essentially, in a nutshell, you can see Russia throwing in some devastating barbs, talking about how the country is extremely shaken to see attacks and the murder of children. By the way, everyone is seeing it, guys. Like, they're not showing it in the corporate media, liberal bubbles not showing it. But you got people on their phone in China and India and Bangladesh, Malaysia, and all these countries around the world, listed and name them. They all seeing it, and they all in shambles. And I showed you guys before, there were sweet summer children, social democrats, that supported the NATO proxy war in Ukraine, that they legitimately believed, because they are sweet summer children, that the West cared about international law because Putin derangement syndrome. And I explained, I'll show quotes of how a lot of these Eastern European leaders are shocked in shambles because they realized it was an entire ploy, and they in Gaza is making them more anti-American. You're seeing Joseph Borrell, I believe it is, in the EU, speaking out more aggressively against the Western foreign policy. And this is the last thing I'm going to show on this topic, because just for sake of time, let's skip all the quotes, but essentially, the world is fucking destroying Israel over their slaughter. And as the UN is exposing Israel for the criminals that they are, Israel is having a full-fledged meltdown on the UN stage, attacking Palestinians, taunting them after they genocide their people. Words can't even explain this meltdown. So I'm going to let it play, and feel free to chime in, Fiona.
I would like to leave you with this. I have been immensely proud to represent my country here. The most moral country in the world. The most moral country in the world. You listen, Palestinian representative, in this warped place. I hope one day you will also see the bias and perversion of morality here.
You see, he literally shit-talking the Palestinian representative, the people he genociding, shit-talking them. In the middle, like, do you guys see how crazy these people are? And as he has the meltdown, the perversion of justice, because the UN won't allow us to sexually assault Palestinians, where they damn near had a civil war. over the right of them to sexually assault people as they claim they're the most moral army. I'm gonna finish the clip. I'll give you a chance to chime in if you feel like it.
And pray, and I pray that you will see the truth. The terrorist organization that this guy represents here and tyrannical regimes should be condemned, not protected, and that Israel should be praised. We are today the vanguard of civilization. We are the vanguard of civilization. But until then, Am Israel Chai. Thank you, Mr. President.
Complete meltdown.
The vanguard of barbarism, I think, would be the most appropriate characterization, I think.
Yeah, we've seen Israel essentially revolt against the concept of international law. I mean, these are things that the grandfathers of the ruling class drew up after the Holocaust. No collective punishment, no use of starvation as a tool of war, because boy, did they fuck each other up during World War II. So let's get together, let's make some rules. And the new generation of the ruling class is so unhinged. They see the rules that their grandfather, and once again, these people are not nice. The ruling class grandfathers are nice. They wasn't outstanding people. They wasn't engaged in imperialism and colonialism. But even they were like, hold up, let's chill out. Let's make some rules. And then their grandchildren, decades later, they're like, those rules that you guys wrote, we're not gonna follow it. Collective rules against collective punishment, fuck that. Rules against starvation as a tool of war, fuck that. We're going to engage in all of that. The next topic I want to cover, because I've been covering this thing, because you have Iran that's destined to strike at any moment against Israel, and China and Russia have declared their intention, because they have a security agreement with Iran, to side with Iran. You had Ukraine that is have an active invasion of Russia going on. They are occupying Russian villages right now. I have said on RBN that we are already in World War III. Like, once people talk about it, like, these are the escalations that people are going to discuss. And I did a live stream yesterday where I did a monologue talking about how the battlegrounds are drawn. And with the recent invasion of Russia by Ukraine, Putin was furious, because it is, in my estimation, an embarrassing moment for Russia to have Ukraine come in, invade, and take over their villages, and they wasn't worried. They didn't see that coming. That's embarrassing for Russia. Putin is embarrassed. You guys know what happens when people of the ruling class become embarrassed. They become more aggressive, and Russia has every reason to get more aggressive. So essentially what I'm saying, and I want to get your thoughts on this, we're seeing the battleground drawn for World War III right now. Where do you see the long-term impacts of this NATO aggression against Russia? The United States in the West supporting Israel in their conquest to start regional war in the Middle East. I want you to take it from there, and the prospect of World War III, because a lot of people don't understand how close we are to it.
Yeah, well, I mean, hopefully we're not yet in World War III, because I think this is something that we want to avoid. Obviously, I mean, it's the danger that a third world war would turn nuclear is, very, very high, and I think, but I think that is the direction we're heading in, for sure. And I think one of the key things to look at all these conflicts, really, what is the kind of main geopolitical contest taking place behind all of this, is that the US is in decline, and they want to stop the rise of China. That is their number one foreign policy objective. So what they're doing on that, obviously they've had a Cold War against China, really, which, there was the pivot to Asia, which was started with Obama, ratcheted up to a new Cold War under Trump, continued under the Biden administration. And basically that's failing. China continues to grow. I think the latest figures for 2023 from the IMF is they grew over 5%, which is 2 times as fast as the United States. And this trajectory is only going to continue. The IMF, which isn't a pro-China institution, they're projecting that, China will be growing at least 2 times as fast as the US over the next few years. And so on this track, China is already, by some measures in terms of PPP, already a larger economy than the United States, but it's going to become much bigger than the United States as an economy in 10 years' time. And this is what the US wants to stop happening. But as I said, its Cold War offensive is failing. So, China's economic rise, its technological rise, its growing diplomatic influence, the fact that 150 countries across the world are part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, the development projects that come with that, all of that is very threatening to the US's kind of ambition to control the whole world. And so what we are seeing, I think, is as the US is losing ground on these other fronts, in terms of diplomacy and the economy, they're doubling down where they're strongest, and that is on the military. And I think the US has, spends way more than the next 8-9 countries. Spends more on the military than the next 8-9 countries combined. There's research actually done by the Tricontinental Institute with Monthly Review, which showed that the US military spending in 2022 was actually much higher than what is declared at $1.5 trillion. And what we're seeing at the moment is two major hot wars in terms of what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening in Palestine, which I think are both US proxy wars, essentially. And then you've got this colossal military buildup against China. So, all the time throughout the year, you're getting more, trilateral security agreements getting agreed with Japan, with the Philippines, with Australia. And all of this is about containing China and strengthening that military noose that the US is constructing around China. So I think all of this is incredibly threatening. And I think what you're saying around the issue of Ukraine, I think it is important to understand that. I think you've discussed this a lot on the show, how this was not an unprovoked war. This was deliberately provoked by NATO expansion. The US wants this war. And I think the key thing is that they kind of see that the ruling class in the United States see weakening Russia as important for strengthening its fight against China in the future, because obviously an alliance between China and Russia is very formidable. So they have this goal of regime change in Russia and to break up that alliance, because then China will be more isolated. So that's kind of, I think, the wider goal. And so I think in that sense, the stakes are huge for NATO and for all the countries under attack, of course, and for the United States. So they're doubling down on war, even though it has been failing in Ukraine. All these hundreds of billions of pounds being spent, they're doubling down on that with escalation. And that's very, very threatening, because you've got two sort of nuclear armed NATO and a nuclear armed Russia, basically at war in Ukraine. And that has huge risks, and the whole trajectory is to escalate. And I don't think that the NATO powers can impose a defeat. There needs to be negotiations. That's the key thing. That's the only way that this is going to be resolved, is through a political solution, which really does mean Ukraine having a neutral status, and there needs to be just a discussion and negotiations around national rights in the east of Ukraine, which obviously has been a massive trigger in this war in terms of the huge attacks that there have been on ethnically Russian and Russian-speaking population in the east of Ukraine. So these are the political issues that need to be discussed and resolved, and they're only going to be resolved really through the negotiating table, because I don't think that either side can impose a final defeat. I mean, the pockets of NATO are very deep. Obviously, huge amount of money has been going into it, into this proxy war, at the expense of the working class in Europe and at the expense of the working class in the United States. But there's no sign that will stop. So I think the really important thing we need to be calling for is negotiations, I think, to kind of end this horrible war, which is creating huge death and destruction. So
yeah, that was a brilliant breakdown of the entire situation, and you're 100% correct that this World War III would be so devastating to the global, well, I won't say global working class, but the humanity as a whole. I just think our ruling class, they convinced themselves that they can survive it. I seen think tanks talk about surviving nuclear war, and I don't think they really care if a large amount of the population is killed off. And I don't say this, I gotta say this with a lot of dread in my heart, but I think people need to be ready, because when you look at all the moves of the ruling class, there's no stopping the trend. You have nuclear submarines that Biden sent to Australia and Japan. And Japan, remember Imperial Japan that raped China, that committed massive atrocities that is underreported? they demilitarized as they were so evil, committed so many atrocities. The era of Imperial Japan, they demilitarized. That era is over. The party of Shinzo Abe teamed up with the neocon establishment, with Neera Tanden, the Clinton Foundation. They waged a hardcore cultural push against the passive culture that developed after World War II. Now Japan is remilitarized, and they talk about conflict with China. The same thing with Germany. Remember Nazi Germany that demilitarized after their crime? Now all of a sudden Germany is a remilitarized nation, declaring their intention to fight Russia to the very end. And anyone who advocates for peace in Germany, we had people on our show that explained before, they're victims of the New Age McCarthyism. And I say all this because I see this conflict coming to an end, and the ruling class is obsessed over it. I'm going to ask you why you think they're obsessed with these conflicts. I know you mentioned how the United States is tanking. Is that the main reason why? And I also wanted to get your thoughts on China, because I also think it's driven by ideology in a lot of sense, because China is showing a different way on how to structure a society. And you mentioned earlier how you were impressed by many things about China. So I want to hear your thoughts on that, on how the prosperity of China possibly relates to this nonstop push towards conflict. Anything you want to add to that, Fiona?
Well, there's a lot to get into there. I mean, just on the issue of Japan, I mean, like you say, the United States is sort of at the moment pushing, and it's been agreed within Japan to increase their military spending to 2% of GDP, which obviously, like you say, is a huge shift. And they're being invited to join the AUKUS military anti-China military pact with Australia, Britain, and the United States as well. I mean, in terms of you were saying around what is the reason for this, why are they so hell-bent on this aggressive path? I think what we're seeing in terms of the rise of China, China becoming #1 country. I mean, if you take from the beginning of like colonialism, like the 600-year history, this is the first. This can be the first time that like a non-white, and I would say socialist country is #1. And to say that this is against the DNA of imperialism to allow that to happen without a fight, essentially. I don't think we should be fatalistic about there is definitely going to be a global war. We want to avoid it, but we should be realistic and sober about how ruthless US imperialism is. This is the only country that's dropped nuclear bombs on Japan, which it's now in a military alliance with. And all the the horrific. I mean, we've just marked the anniversary of the dropping of those bombs in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and so I don't think that the US should be underestimated in that, and how much of a change in the international balance of forces that would be. So for the US, because their doctrine is to the US ruling class's doctrine is to control the world, to be a global dictator, really. I mean, they dress it up in the words of democracy, but it really is to just call the shots and dominate. They see China's rise as an issue, as an existential threat to that, essentially. So like I said, they've tried all these Cold War measures which aren't working. So they are increasingly moving things onto a military terrain. So I think. And one of the key features of this period is, previous periods when we had a world war, like World War I and World War II, it was actually a big dynamic, and it is a fight between imperialist countries. In World War I, that was obvious. In World War II, obviously, you had the Soviet Union intervening as a non-imperialist country to defeat the Nazis, but these were inter-imperialist conflicts. Whereas now, what you're seeing is, obviously, the United States is bringing behind it all of the other imperialist countries, be it Japan, Germany, Britain, and others in the global north into a bloc. And so it's like an imperialist offensive against China, Russia, and the global south, essentially. And the problem being, they are losing out economically, like China and the global south, combined are getting larger now than, formations like the G7, which before have, had been a majority of world GDP. That's all shifting, but what they do have is huge, not monopoly, but a real advantage on arms. I mean, the US plus all of its allies account for 75% of military spending at the moment. Now, obviously, it's not the case that countries like China and Russia, Iran aren't armed. Of course they are, but they are outgunned in that sense. So I think that's what's very dangerous about it, is that, and that's where I want to sort of mention this hyper-imperialism sort of thesis, which is that you have the unity essentially of the ruling class in imperialist countries behind the United States in this main mission around stopping the rise of China and the war drive, which is really being led for that ultimate goal. And that's not to say that there isn't opposition within the imperialist countries, that there is. Look what we've seen on Gaza, these huge mass movements. But there is also a lot of repression and censorship and trying to push down any alternative voices, as we experience with being involved in sort of independent media and stuff, which is absolutely vital in this situation, because I think there's a real battle of ideas and kind of, I think on the issue of Palestine, people in general across the world are in a majority clear about what's going on, but I think there is less clarity when it comes to NATO's war on Ukraine, and also less clarity on the issue of China because of all the propaganda, and people haven't necessarily seen through that yet. So I think we've got a really important job to do. I think like what you were saying around, China's not our enemy, Russia's not our enemy, the enemy is the US and its allies.
Yeah, very, very well said, as always. Where do you report out of, Fiona? I think it's London, right? I think.
Yeah, I'm in London. Yeah.
Very, very well said. Well, I gotta have you on talk about Starmer in the UK one day if you're down. Because Starmer, Labour has gone completely to shit. They full-fledged supporters of genocide, as we all know. Gotta have you on talk about that. But despite you being in London, I'm gonna ask you a question. I guess it could apply for people in the UK as well. Like what as a way to end this stream, it's very great to have you on. Great to meet you and talk to you for the first time. And I appreciate your analysis. Make sure you guys follow Eyes on Latin America. This is my third stream in a row. I had a speech I gave on Sunday. I'm going to be in Chicago next week. I got to prep for that. I got a supply run for the mutual aid on the 19th, which I won't be able to make, but we're still going to fund and support this mutual aid event on the 19th. So I got to do that run after this stream. So I hope you guys don't mind me only keeping it an hour today, because I'm exhausted. There's been a lot going on in the RBN community, which is great. But Fiona, I want to pass it to you for one last question or anything else you want to say. What is your suggestion? Because I think it applies to the UK too. What will you say to the people who live in the heart of the empire? The people who live in the United States, in London, the UK, what are your best suggestions if they want to resist the empire? What should they do? Any last thoughts on that? Because I always want to give a call to action. What's the best way we can resist this genocidal regime, in your opinion?
Well, I think the absolute number one issue is to support the Palestinians. And I think, that's been the case for the past 10 months. And it's got to be at the top of everyone's agenda who wants a peaceful world, to support the Palestinians until there's a ceasefire at the bare minimum. But obviously, there's going to be a very long process of reconstruction and, development of a Palestinian state. And I think, that is the most acute fight taking place. But I think it's very important, in addition to that, to kind of get a better understanding of the world that we're living in, because we're so propagandized. And I think, shows like this are just really important to kind of break through this fog of war, because the most important thing I think we need to do, alongside building movement against climate change, which is the other existential threat we're facing, is to build a movement against this push to a third world war. So like I say, I just want to give a little bit of a plug, if that's okay, to a new YouTube channel we've created through the No Cold War Britain campaign, which is called Empire Watch, which we started about 3 weeks ago. And basically, we've got a podcast on there called Global Majority for Peace, and we're just interviewing people all over the world, similar to the kind of concept you have around, internationalism against imperialism, basically. So that's kind of a new initiative that we have. And I think, the more we work together and cooperate, the better. I mean, great to have you on the show potentially at some point on that, if you're up for it. But I think this is a really, important thing, is to kind of get the ideas right, because they're trying to soften up public opinion every single day for this war drive. And people need to understand this is not in our interest. It's not in our interest financially, because, this money is taken away from healthcare, education, public services, wages, but also, no one's going to survive a third world war if it goes nuclear. We're looking at a nuclear winter. So I think that we have, just for our prosperity and our life, we need to fight against this very dangerous war drive.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a pleasure having you on and talking to you for the first time. We definitely have aligned goals, so we definitely will have you on. Definitely down to your show if you guys will have me as well. Make sure you guys check out Fiona Edwards and their amazing work on eyesonlatinamerica.com. Savvy and JB have a very interesting show tomorrow. They will have Midwestern Marks and the American Communist Party on to talk to them and ask them questions. We're all about dialogue. So Savvy and JB's leading the discourse with the American Communist Party. That should be interesting. Friday, I have my masterpiece that I'm working on, the Palestinian African Solidarity Roundtable in the light of this psyop to divide Black Americans and Palestinians. It's going to be myself, Rome, and Ajamu Baraka from Black Alliance for Peace. And I'm going to have my amazing friend from Madison for Palestine. Actually, she organized, and she's going to have some big pro-Palestine influencers and activists that will be joining. There's going to be a solidarity panel to aggressively rebuke this psyop that's been developing. So that's Friday. You guys see how busy I am. I'm going to rest a little bit. Hope you guys don't mind. It's only been an hour. But I greatly enjoyed our guests today. I hope you guys follow them. Have a good day. Peace out, y'all.